These are the video Sparknotes for the Count of Monte Cristo, pages 1 through 47. And the story begins in medias res, which means in the middle of things, where the Pharaon is skillfully but mournfully sailed into the harbor of Marseille, and the ship owner awaits it. And the ship owner's name is Immorel. And we're told that when Dantes was on the journey, the Captain Leclerc died of brain fever. But right before he did, he asked Dantes to deliver a letter to the Isle of Elba, which is right here. And by the way, Monte Cristo was here with the orange arrow. And so this Napoleon resides on this Isle of Elba. But currently in France, the reigning king is King Louis XVIII. So this would technically be treason for him to deliver this letter. But since the captain has died and they buried him at sea, they did one last wish for him. They granted his last request. And Dantes was also promoted to captain, which makes Danglars very jealous. Danglars is the ship's purser. So Dantes is able to deliver this letter to one of Napoleon's cohorts. And he also gets a chance to talk to Napoleon. And Napoleon even remembers the ship owner, Immorel. And he asks Immorel how that family is doing. He knows of that ship owner. So Dantes is kind of fangirling, and so is Immorel when he hears this story. Now, when the captain was talking to Dantes, Dantes admitted that there was a letter also to go back to Paris. And Danglars has been spying on Dantes when he was talking to the captain and when he brought the letter back on board. So Danglars tells Morel, and we wonder who else he's told about this letter that will be delivered to Paris from Napoleon, which technically, again, could be treason, but it also was the captain's last wish. And back in Marseille, Immorel is happy to hear all of this. But he also questions Danglars about a few things, like why were they late getting back, or why didn't they follow the itinerary? Now, Dantes can't answer at this time because he's getting the ship, set. He has to set the anchor and do all this other work. So Immorel talks to Danglars at first, who, sits there and kind of hates on Dantes and questions him and undermines him. And then Immorel speaks to Dantes, and Dantes says that he and Danglars didn't really get along. In fact, they kind of got into it. But Dantes said that he felt like Danglars did his job. And Immorel asked Dantes for lunch, but Dantes says, I'm going to go meet up with my fiance and my father, who I've been missing, but I will have lunch with you later, Immorel. It was a great treat for Immorel to ask Dantes to lunch, but Danglars is very jealous about this promotion Dantes has received. And we find out that Dantes' father has been very hungry while Dantes was away because the neighbor asked for a debt to be repaid while Dantes was away. So the old man had very little money to eat on. He was starving. But Dantes says, we don't have any problems now, Father, since I've been promoted, and we have a lot of money, so we have no worries. But the neighbor gets really jealous about this. So they kind of go from rags to riches pretty quick, and the neighbor doesn't really like that. And we also meet this other character named Fernand, who is Dantes' fiance's cousin, who has a crush on her. But we find out that Mercedes is not interested in Fernand at all, only as a friend-zoned. But Fernand is not used to being turned down. And when he meets Dantes, he doesn't like Dantes at all. In fact, Mercedes has to tell Fernand to shake Dantes' hand. And Dantes says, I didn't know that I would be greeted by an enemy, talking about Fernand. And Fernand ends up jealously running away after they shake hands. And the two lovers, kind of embrace, and we feel happy for them. But I know that they are star-crossed lovers. There's going to be like this man versus fate type of conflict here with all of their haters. So Catarou and the neighbor, and Danglars, the ship's purser, and Fernand, the cousin of Mercedes, all kind of troll Dantes. They all are drinking in the marketplace, and they're kind of hating on Dantes. They can't stand to let him win and get all these great things in life. So they kind of hatch this plan that the audience isn't really told about. And we kind of get this feeling that there's a plan because Danglars says, I'm going to come up with a plan. But these two simpletons are kind of useless. He's talking about Catarou and Fernand. But we know there's something going on there. It must have something to do with the letter. Dantes gets a week off to deliver this letter to Paris and to get married to Mercedes. And the conspirators watch. And then there's the betrothal feast. Mercedes and Dantes are getting married, and all the sailors are there. Dantes even says himself, I'm getting all this good fortune. It's making me feel a little uneasy. Like things could go terribly wrong because I'm so happy right now. And guess what they do? The cops bust in. They arrest Dantes. Danglars kind of whispers that he thinks that it may have something to do with Napoleon. And Morel promises to take care of things. In fact, he goes to Villefort several times to ask Dantes to be released. Mercedes is beside herself. This is her happiest day and most unhappy day at the same time. And the three conspirators kind of smile on. They don't really say anything to help Dantes. At a similar wedding feast for the deputy prosecutor, we find out the deputy prosecutor, Villefort, is getting married into the Saint Maron family. They are royalists, whereas Villefort's father is a known Bonapartist. And both families nearly lost their heads during the Reign of Terror, but it's clear that Villefort supports the king and not his father's politics. And he plans to marry into this family to get closer to the king. But the wedding is also interrupted by a letter alleging that Dantes is a Bonapartist trying to bring back the emperor, so Villefort must leave. And in the meantime, we know historically that there's a coup being staged and Napoleon will come back for 100 days. And we know that Villefort is also unabashedly ambitious when it comes to his political endeavors. He will do anything to claw on to power. As you can see, the blood dripping there and the nail marks. And Morel even appeals to Villefort, say, can you please help Dantes? But this is a risky move. Like, Dantes is a alleged Bonapartist, and Morel doesn't want to be accused of this too. So Villefort's kind of stuck between the right thing to do and supporting the king and getting his own ambitions realized. And Dantes asks for mercy when he's examined. And Villefort almost lets him go. But then he finds out that the letter was addressed to his father, which Dantes doesn't know that it's Villefort's father, because Villefort's father is named Noirtier, and Villefort styles himself Villefort to keep his politics separate from his father. And Villefort lies and says, I'll just burn the letter. Don't worry about it. I won't send you to jail. Just don't tell anybody about this exchange. Well, this turns out very bad for Dantes. And Villefort's just trying to protect himself, trying to protect his father at the same time. Dantes is led away. He's put on a boat. No one will tell him where he's going. He can't say goodbye to Mercedes. He thinks he's going to be set free. But on the boat, he almost throws himself off, and he actually sees Mercedes in the distance. He's very upset. And when they end up at the Chateau d'If, he refuses to be cooperative. He throws a stool at one of the jailers, and they end up putting him in with this crazy abbé down in the dungeon. So back at the Villefort feast, Villefort asks to be introduced to the king so he can tell the king about this plot that Napoleon's coming back to the throne. Of course, he'll leave the part about his father out. Mercedes appeals to Villefort, but Villefort won't help her. But it's said that he felt very guilty, and if she would have pushed her way through the door, he would have helped her. But he's a coward. And, of course, Mercedes only has Fernand to cry on his shoulder, and he tries to, of course, use this for his gain. And Morel comes again to appeal to Villefort, but Villefort says there's nothing more that I can do. Do you want to get in trouble for being associated with a Bonapartist? So here we have Villefort kind of having a guilty conscience here, but doing nothing. Caderousse with a very guilty conscience and drinking himself into a stupor. And Danglars, who it said he doesn't have any problem sleeping at all. And here's the theme. A person who's successful, innocent, and full of happiness can sometimes encounter enemies without even trying. And jealousy is also a punishment for the target and for the envious party. Here we have the character development, which you can pause this if you want to look at this. Some of the literary devices like dramatic irony and foil. When it comes to the conspirators, foil is an important literary device, and dramatic irony is important for the 100 Days reign. And you can pause this to read the effects. And finally, word choice. I think fair